Welcome to yet another edition of Talk of the Town, a new show on Quincy Access Television coming to you from the City of Presidents in Quincy, Massachusetts. Today I'm excited to launch a new segment of the show called ChaiWith. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Dr. Dinesh Sharma. He is the author of a book called Barack Obama in Indonesia and Hawaii, The Making of a Global President. And Dr. Sharma has traveled a long way from Princeton, New Jersey to be with us today. And just to give you a little background about Dr. Sharma, I'm just going to read it so that I don't get it wrong. Dr. Sharma has a doctorate, and he's a cultural psychologist and marketing consultant, and his degree is from Harvard University. And at present, he is a senior fellow at the Institute for International and Cross-Cultural Psychology at St. Francis College in New York. Dr. Sharma is also a columnist for Asia Times Online and writes about globalization, politics, terrorism, India-US relations, among other topics. And he's the author and editor of 3 books and many peer-reviewed articles, and his articles have appeared in a range of newspapers and journals, including Wall Street Journal Online and the Far East Economic Review, Middle East Times, to name a few. And he lives in Princeton, New Jersey, with his wife and 2 children. So, aloha, and
aloha,
and thank you.
Nice to be here.
Yes.
Thank you.
And we're very pleased to have you, and thank you for coming such a long way just to tell us about this exciting new book that you just wrote. So before we get into about the book and things, I just wanted to share something with the audience that you were
Sure.
telling me earlier, that President Obama's sister, Dr. Maya Soetoro, actually did some book signings with you, and she was part of the book. So if you can tell us, what her feedback was, what her reactions to the book were.
Yeah, I interviewed her for the book. So the book is, Barack Obama in Hawaii and Indonesia. It's really the first cultural biography of the president's first 18, 20 years that he spent off the mainland in Hawaii and in Indonesia, 2 islands primarily. A lot of the books that have come out on the president really begin in Chicago in earnest, looking at his political career. So what I did in this book is really examining in detail his early years, the formative years that really shaped the president that we have today. The first multicultural president, the first global president, the first president from the Pacific, the first president, obviously the first African American president, that goes without saying now.
Yes.
But of course, when you dig into his biography, he has a lot more nuance and subtlety and detail and depth in his biography, unlike other presidents. So I interviewed Maya Soetoro Ng, his sister, who lives in Hawaii, who's also an educator herself by training. And she's been at 4 book signings for me as a guest. She's been very cooperative and positive about the book.
Oh, that's great.
Very supportive.
That's great. So it's that says volumes for the authenticity of the information that's in the book, and and I think you were also telling me that a lot of the pictures that you used in the book were the family photos were given to you by her. So.
Well, it's from the family collection. Yeah, I mean, I obtained in my research, which took a couple of years to complete, I was able to gain access to some family photos, as well as some archived materials, and also some photos that I took on my own, particularly of Indonesia, Jakarta, where President Obama spent 4.5 years of his early years, the early elementary school years, where he attended 2 different schools, a Catholic school and a public school. So I did research on that as well.
Okay. So that kind of leads nicely into my first question, which is that what was it like? Like what made you think about writing this book, and what was your journey like? Where did you go, and the people you met and the process, how long it took you to complete the book, if you could tell us.
Yeah, I really started to think about writing the book during the primaries when I saw, what really compelled me was a kind of a synergy between the times, the historical times, the changes that we're going through now in America, particularly having to do with globalization, and what I saw in President Obama's biography, having read his book, Dreams for My Father, that here we had a president whose life was not just confined to the Midwest necessarily, or to the West Coast, or to the East Coast. So when I presented this book in Hawaii, the editor from Honolulu Advertiser said, "Well, Dinesh, do you mean to say that this is the first president we've elected who's not from Ohio?" Which in essence is the case, because Ohio has the distinction of having produced many presidents before. So President Obama was really the first Pacific president to come from Hawaii, which is the last state to join the Union. And he's the first president who spent a significant amount of time in Indonesia, Southeast Asia in particular, and first president really whose father was from Africa and then went back. First president whose mother was an anthropologist, a PhD in cultural anthropology, and did a lot of her work, development work in Southeast Asia. So when you dig into his biography, you learn that yes, of course, he's the first African-American president, but he's also the first multicultural head of any Western democracy. Canada and Australia have had multiculturalism as a policy, but they've not been able to elect somebody like Obama to the executive office, and there are many reasons for that, which we don't have time to get into here. But the point is, is nonetheless clear, namely that America was able to achieve this, I argue in the book, partly because of the history of immigration, and partly because of the qualities, the exceptional qualities in some ways, that America instilled or inculcated in the president. As he said himself, his story would not be possible in any other country, which speaks to a kind of American exceptionalism that he carries within himself, which also resonates with the people at this time, at this turning point as we enter the 21st century. So it was that synergy that between the times and the candidate that really excited me about the project and wanted to look into it in more depth. But the journey itself, though, took me to Hawaii. It took me to Indonesia. I did interviews in Washington, D.C., Chicago, New York, and then a lot of archival research as well.
And how long did it take for the book to
Well, the writing itself took, about 9 months. About 9 chapters in the book, a chapter a month roughly. But then you have to go through a lot of editing once you submit it. But the research itself, part-time, because I was working, consulting, in fact, in Boston for a biotech company at the time when the idea came to me. So I was really doing it in between consulting jobs that I had. The research probably took a couple of years from start to finish, from 07 to 09. Yeah, and then the book came out really late last year. So the book hasn't really been out for a year quite yet. It's only been out for about 6 months, a little over 6 months. Came out in October last year, and it's happy to say it was chosen by Booklist Online, which is the American Library Association's book review newspaper. It was chosen as the top 10 Black history book for 2012 in February of this year. So, and it has been reviewed extensively in Europe as well as in the U.S. in the various domestic markets.
Oh, okay. So it took. It took a lot of research. It took. You had to make sure that your facts were accurate and.
Yeah, because you're writing on a sitting president. So that's the part of the book that's kind of exciting as well as interesting and kind of nerve-wracking to some extent, in the sense that when you're writing about a sitting president, you have to make sure that everything is legally vetted, approved, everything has been researched properly. The editorial department at the publisher, that I was with at the time, combed through everything with a very sort of fine-tooth comb, if you will. So I went through a lot of nerve-wracking days and nights, making sure that all the details were verified, checked, validated multiple times over. So I think that's added to the quality of the book, and it is in some ways, I would say, the first kind of really cultural biography of Barack Obama, the first multicultural president, the first African-American president, really, the first president from the Pacific. His early years that are diverse, international, global years.
Right. So did you get any input? Did you contact the president? Did you have any, input from him in terms of
No,
facts or?
not from him, from his sister, from
Right.
a lot of his peers, teachers, classmates. But no, I didn't speak with him directly. And because the book has kind of a psychological angle, I'm not sure what he would have said to me if I had posed these questions to him anyway. He would have said, I cannot answer these questions. What do you mean?
Right.
You know,
Right.
so, but he has given other interviews to other journalists, which I talk about in the book in detail. But even in those interviews, he's very specific about the kinds of questions he's able to answer, because he's in office. So,
Right.
because everything that he says is up for political,
Right.
gamemanship and interpretation. So,
Right.
and because my book is cultural and psychological,
Right.
it wasn't really necessary to kind of interview him directly, because there's a lot of literature already out, available publicly in the public domain,
Right.
on the president, including his own 2 books,
Right.
Dreams for My Father and The Audacity of Hope,
Right.
that are publicly available.
Right. 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 Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about what the book is about, and any interesting information that you can share with our audience about President Obama's childhood or his background? Any new things you found out that you said, oh, I didn't know this,
Yeah. So I mean, there are several chapters in the book that are kind of the heart of the book, that really look at the places where he grew up, the people who shaped his life, the kinds of environments that he lived in, the schools that he attended, the mosques, the churches, the playgrounds. So I visited all of these places. I did what an anthropologist would call ethnography, but it's also journalistic in the sense that I interviewed people in depth,
Right. Right.
or what you would call deep kind of background analysis on the president. So there's a lot of interesting detail in the book about his upbringing in Indonesia and in Hawaii. And so people have said that it's an interesting book. It's a new way of looking at the president, interesting way of looking at the president. So it has a lot of interesting kind of, what I think is relevant information about his leadership style. So there's a story in the book from 9th grade that his English teacher told me, of the kind of leader that he was, even at a very young age in high school. He used to be very metacognitive, if you were to use a psychological term.
Right.
He would premeditate before he would give his opinion. He was not the first one to jump in with his opinions in class. He would wait for everybody else to first give their input before he would chime in with his response. So there are some interesting details about vignettes and narrative detail about his high school, as well as information that goes even earlier than that to his elementary school in Indonesia.
And we just had a picture up of President Obama when he was in the 5th grade.
Correct.
So that picture you got from his sister? Or
That picture I obtained from the school.
from the school?
The Punahu Academy School, which is the oldest prep school on the island of Hawaii. It's been there for 150 years. It's an institution, on the island. So if you go to Punahu Academy, you're part of a club, an elite club. And the way President Obama described it, he called it an incubator for the island elites. So if you went to Punahu, you have a kind of a ticket to a kind of a life and a access potentially to corridors of power in Hawaii and so on and so forth. And Punahu has produced a lot of public servants, intellectuals, athletes, senators, congressmen that have come through that school. It's like Phillips Academy, I guess, in Massachusetts, or Lawrenceville Prep in New Jersey. It's one of those types of schools. So I argue partly in the book that if President Obama hadn't attended Punahu, he wouldn't have necessarily the facility, the calmness that he has when he's getting grilled by reporters on questions, kind of practically on every subject under the sun.
Right.
That he's able to without fumbling a word, is able to answer all these questions. Because at Punahu, the ethic is that you have to be smart and you have to be cool about it, and that it's cool to be smart. That's kind of the ethic that he learned at Punahu.
Yeah.
So that picture is from 5th grade. But of course, he was there for 8 years, till he graduated from high school, and then he moves to LA to go to Occidental College. So the book is really looking at what the psychologists would call the sort of the formative years, the early years in childhood as well as adolescence.
Okay.
And because he's really the first president who spent a significant amount of time in Hawaii, off the mainland, the continental U.S., that I argue partly in the book that, and others have said this as well, that he's really our first global president.
Yes.
Because his worldview was shaped by those early experiences in Hawaii and in Indonesia,
Right.
and in the Pacific broadly.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I remember when during his inaugural, during the presidential inaugural, in the parade, his school was there, and
Right.
the reason it caught my attention is because the way that word is spelled, Punahu, is like an Indian city, Pune. And
Right.
and that's that's where my mom's from. So
Oh, okay.
so I remember thinking, oh, that's an interesting name. It's almost Indian. So
Yeah, it's Polynesian actually, which means Punhu. The word Punhu itself means Kapunahu, means the place of the spring.
Oh, okay.
And the story that's attached to that, the name, is that there was a spring at the site where the school was founded by the missionaries 150 years ago. So the word itself literally means offspring, and so the chapter in the book that's where I talk about Punhu is called A New Spring in Hawaii, taking from the meaning of the word Punahu, or Kapunahu.
Oh, okay.
So it's a Polynesian Hawaiian word,
okay.
which means the spring.
I see. That's an interesting name. So now that now that the book has been out for a couple of months, what kind of feedback have you been getting from people?
Yeah, like I mentioned, it was picked as one of the top 10 Black history books by American Library Association. So I was very pleased with that. It has been reviewed in Europe in several major newspapers. I was invited to do a book tour in Europe. In 10 cities by Democrats abroad. There are about 4.5, 5 million Americans who live in Europe as expats, and they're politically organized, and they pay taxes and they vote. They're as American, as Americans living here in some ways, or in some ways more Americans, because they have kind of an objective view of America as well as a subjective view. So I spoke to them in 10 different cities, including Rome and Paris, London, Strasbourg, Luxembourg, and there I got favorable reviews for the book. And then the book has also been reviewed extensively by African American newspapers. So, but mainstream papers that have an African American following: Cincinnati Herald, Dallas, several Dallas newspapers, Houston newspapers. So the book's been reviewed extensively in the U.S. In print as well as online newspapers as well. And I've done quite a few interviews in 7, 8 different cities, including Boston. In fact, I've done interviews for all the sort of local channels in Boston. So this is like my 6th interview, or so, I think 5th or 6th interview in Boston. So I'm quite pleased with the response in Boston as well. And then we got a great response actually on the West Coast. Again, I think because of the theme of multiculturalism that resonates on the West Coast extensively with the population there. I did a lot of radio and TV there as well. So it's been, to my surprise, it's been quite well received.
Oh, that's good. And it's interesting, that you're in Quincy, and Quincy is called City of Precedents.
Right, you mentioned that.
Because of our founding.
John and Quincy Adams.
Yeah, John Quincy Adams.
Right.
They were the 2nd and 6th presidents, founding father.
Right.
So I think this is almost a must
Right,
in your book tour.
Right.
To to come.
Well,
here.
in the book I do research the history of the American presidents, and so when you actually peel through the cultural layering of President Obama's biography, you find that there are certain similarities between President Obama and other presidents that we've had. For instance, and this has been talked about by historians, is that American presidents have had very strong mothers, invariably, including Jefferson, Washington, Bill Clinton, Roosevelt. And so there's a literature on the mothers of American presidents.
Right.
And invariably what people have found is that in large number of presidents, they were raised by very strong mother figures. So for instance, in the case of President Lincoln, his mother had passed away at a very young age. He was raised by his stepmother. She was really one of his biggest supporters, because he was distant in his relationship with his father. So we find President Obama has that kind of similarity, because his father left when President Obama's father left when he was 2 years old. He was really raised by his mother and his grandmother.
Right.
And then Michelle Robinson fills that role of another strong female archetype, if you will, in his life. So I talk about that in the book extensively, in detail, the roles that have been played by mothers. And then the other thing you find in the lives of American presidents is that the father figure is either distant or missing. In large numbers of American presidents, this has been the case. We've found, based on historical research, that for instance, George Washington had lost his father at a young age. Jefferson, Bill Clinton recently, was an orphan because his father died when he wasn't born at the time, and so you see this trend as well. So this is again a consistent trend that you see in President Obama's biography as well. So when you peel through the cultural layering, psychologically, he has markers, some of the biographical markers of somebody who's motivated from a young age to become president.
I think I heard somewhere or read somewhere that he actually, when he was asked when he was very, very young, he said he wanted to be a president.
Okay, so there's a story in my book that has researched that angle. This was in 3rd grade when he was 9 years old. He wrote an essay in Indonesian, Bahasa. The question was, what is your dream? And he wrote an essay describing that his mother is very beautiful. She has long flowing hair. He loves to live in Indonesia. He loves to go to school in Indonesia, and that one day he wants to be PM. Now, PM in Indonesian context could have meant paramilitary police or prime minister, equivalent to a president in the American context. So whether, I argue in the book whether that was the early spark, if you will, that began the journey in the mind of a child. Because this is the age when children's mind is very imaginative and open and given to kind of global thinking that anything is possible. And so, and it's been, people who study creativity have argued that kids who tend to excel creatively tend to hold on to their creative dreams from a very young age and then pursue them, relentlessly. So if you believe that this is a verifiable, valid dream, which I do provide a lot of evidence for in the book, then you could argue, as I do in the book, that this was the early spark that really began President Obama's journey towards global leadership.
I see. So has that spark been seen in at any other time in his life, or? Do you know, or?
Well, I mean, I think it's consistent. I mean, you see it throughout his early upbringing. For instance, when he arrives in Occidental, and he's asked to speak at a rally that the students have organized, a student-organized rally about anti-apartheid. He begins to speak for the first time to a group of students on a bright, sunny summer day, and they immediately begin to listen to him, and he realizes that his voice, his political voice, or his voice that he's just discovered, is carrying a resonance with them, and he begins to get in touch with his political voice, if you will. I argue in the book. So yeah, that spark is there, and you could see it in his biography. It emerges, resurfaces at various points in the biography, and of course, you just have to hear him speak, and that he has that gift of communication, to be able to put ideas, thoughts, feelings into words, and to be able to motivate people, which is what he does really well, among other things, of course. So that's clearly one of the strengths that he's had, from a very young age.
Right. All right. So. So now we're coming towards the end of the show, and So in the remaining time, if you could tell us what you have planned from, in the future. And
Yeah,
at
so I
present.
have a book event. I'll be at a conference in South Africa in Cape Town in July, where I'll be speaking about the book and President Obama's biography and his global identity. I will also be in London most likely in June for a couple of interviews again about the book. And then I'm actually appearing right now as we speak on a TV show called This Week in Education in Princeton in Central Jersey, which I taped several weeks ago. So the book has generated a lot of attention and interest. So I'm very happy for that, and so I'm going to be continuing to do more book events and signings and interviews as we move forward.
Wow, very good. And I think you were also mentioning that there's a likelihood that this book might come out in paperback.
Yeah, the book most likely. Yeah, we've sold out the first print of the book. It's going to go into second print, and then at some point it'll go into paperback as a trade book. That's what we're planning right now. So if President Obama wins, which seems likely at this point, I know I'm in Massachusetts, which is Governor Romney's old stomping ground. But based on the numbers that we have right now, it appears if the economy keeps improving, that President Obama will carry the day. Then of course, it bodes well for my book.
Right, right.
So, but I do have another book project that's already in the works, which is a book that's looking at Barack Obama at the crossroads of globalization, which is an edited book. It's a survey of President Obama's global approval rating or image, and of course by extension the approval of American approval rating and image, and how the American brand has improved or changed as a result of President Obama coming into office. So we're doing a survey, but in-depth analytical study of American brand as well as President Obama's brand image in 25, 30 different countries. And that book is going to come out shortly after the election.
Oh, okay, okay.
And it's called Obama at the Crossroads of Globalization. That's what it's called at the moment. Yeah.
Right.
So that's another book project that's in the works already.
Oh, okay. So, we'd like to wish you best of luck on all your book projects
Thank you so much.
and to the success of this book as well.
Thank you.
I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I plan to soon. And also, it was a great pleasure to have you here in May, which is Asian American Heritage Month, and so talking about President Obama's South Asian background. And educating people about the Asian culture is what is mostly that we do in the month of May all over the country. So this was a nice way to celebrate that here in Quincy.
Thank you.
So yes, and so thank you for coming such a long distance.
I appreciate it.
And
well, it's not as far as Hawaii, so it's just a few hours.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's
and
true.
this is my old stomping ground. So I went, like you said, I went to Harvard, so I know the ins and outs of Boston.
Right, right, right. So, and if you'd like to be a show on the guest or contact me for any ideas, you can reach me at kumu@kumutv.com, and the website is www.kumutv.com. And until next time, au revoir.
We forgot the T.
Go ahead.